There's a version of you 10 years from now sitting in a quiet room with a calculator and a sinking feeling. You're not broke. You didn't fail. You didn't make reckless mistakes or gamble everything away. In fact, you did what most people around you were doing. You earned well. You worked hard. You celebrated your wins. You looked the part. But as you scroll through the retirement projections on your screen, something doesn't add up. The numbers are far lower than they should be. And the worst part, you can't point to a single catastrophic decision. There was no market crash that wiped you out. No emergency that drained your savings. Just 1,000 small choices. A decade of looking successful while quietly trading away the foundation of actual wealth. This is the reality facing millions of high earners right now, and most of them have no idea it's happening. Welcome to Asset Audiobooks, where we talk about the money truths that shape your future, not just your weekend. If you're here, you're probably not struggling financially in the traditional sense. You're doing well, maybe very well, but somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a question you keep avoiding. If I'm earning this much, why doesn't it feel like I'm building anything that lasts? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Because you might be spending your wealth before you ever get the chance to build it. Not on necessities, not even on luxuries you deeply value, but on something far more expensive and far less visible: your image. And the cost of that image isn't just what you spend today, it's what you'll never have tomorrow. Let me be clear. This isn't about shaming you for enjoying nice things. It's not about living in deprivation or rejecting success. It's about something much more important. It's about understanding the invisible trade you're making every time you choose how you want to be seen over who you want to become. Most people think financial security is about making more money. And yes, income matters. But here's the part nobody talks about. The more you earn, the more expensive your image becomes. The bar rises. The expectations shift. What used to feel like a reward starts to feel like a requirement. That car, that watch, that vacation, that apartment in the right part of town, that outfit that signals you've made it. These aren't just purchases, they're signals, and signals are expensive. Because once you start sending them, you can't easily stop. Your peers expect it. Your social circle reflects it. Your identity begins to wrap around it. And before you know it, you're not spending to enjoy life. You're spending to maintain a version of yourself that exists primarily in other people's perception. And here's the trap. That version of you looks successful, but it's costing the real you a retirement. There's a term economists use called opportunity cost. It's the value of what you give up when you choose one thing over another. But in personal finance, we rarely talk about it in emotional terms. We treat it like a spreadsheet problem, a number on a page. But opportunity cost isn't abstract. It's your future freedom. It's the age at which you can stop working because you want to, not because you have to. It's the ability to say no to things that drain you. It's the margin to take risks, pivot careers, support your family, or simply breathe without financial anxiety. And every dollar you spend to look successful today is a dollar that won't compound into freedom tomorrow. Let me give you a picture of what that actually means. Imagine two people, both 30 years old, both earning six figures, both smart, ambitious, credible professionals. Person A spends about $1,500 a month on image, nice dinners out, latest tech, stylish wardrobe updates, weekend trips that photograph well, a car lease that fits the role. It doesn't feel reckless. It feels normal, deserved even. Person B spends half that, not because they earn less, not because they're cheap, but because they've decided that the opinion of others is not worth the cost of their future autonomy. Fast forward 30 years. Person A has lived a visibly successful life. They've kept up. They've been seen. They've signaled status at every turn. But their retirement account sits at around $400,000. It's not nothing, but it's not enough to maintain the lifestyle they've built their identity around. So they keep working, not because they love it, but because stopping would mean admitting the image was never sustainable. Person B retired 3 years ago, not because they're rich, but because they built wealth in silence while everyone else built appearances in public. Their portfolio crossed 2 million. They didn't sacrifice joy. They just refused to rent their identity from the approval of others. Same income, same starting point. Completely different ending. And the difference wasn't discipline in the traditional sense. It was clarity. It was knowing the difference between success and the performance of success. So if you've ever felt that nagging gap between what you earn and what you're actually building, this audiobook is for you. If you've ever wondered why your balance sheet doesn't reflect your effort, your intelligence, or your income, stay with me. Because over the next few hours, we're going to dismantle one of the most expensive illusions of modern life. The belief that looking successful and being successful are the same thing. We're going to walk through exactly how image-driven spending erodes wealth, how social comparison becomes a financial prison, how even smart, high-earning people end up trapped in a cycle of consumption that feels good in the moment but hollow in the long run. And more importantly, we're going to talk about how to break free, not by becoming extreme, not by rejecting success or status entirely, but by realigning your spending with your actual values, your actual future, and your actual definition of a life well lived. This isn't theory. It's not pessimism. It's pattern recognition. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's begin. Let's start with a question most people never ask themselves. How much does it cost you to be you? Not the you sitting at home in sweatpants on a Sunday morning, but the you that shows up to brunch, the you that walks into the office, the you that posts on social media, the you that exists in the eyes of your peers, your colleagues, your old classmates who are secretly keeping score. That version of you has a price tag, and it's growing every year. Here's what makes this so insidious. You don't see it as one big expense. It never shows up on a bill labeled cost of image maintenance. Instead, it's woven into everything. It's the reason you upgrade your phone every 2 years even though the old one works fine. It's the reason you can't wear the same outfit to 2 events in the same month. It's the reason you say yes to dinners you don't want to attend and trips you can't quite afford but can't imagine missing. Because what would people think? That question, right there, is expensive. And the answer you've been giving it is quietly bankrupting your future. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Marcus. He's 34, works in tech sales, makes about $130,000 a year. By most measures, he's winning. But when we sat down and actually tracked where his money was going, something startling emerged. Marcus wasn't living extravagantly. He didn't have a gambling problem or a shopping addiction, but he was spending nearly $3,000 a month on what we eventually called social credibility expenses. His lease on a German sedan, $650 a month. Could he have bought a reliable used car for cash? Absolutely. But in his words, I pull up to client meetings. I can't roll up in something that makes me look like I'm struggling. His apartment, $2,200 a month, located in the part of town where people he respects also live. He could have paid $1,400 for something 15 minutes farther out, but then he'd have to explain why he didn't live in the mix. Clothes, between $400 and $700 a month. Not every month, but averaged out, that's the number. He needs to look sharp, needs the right brands in the right settings, Because appearance is part of the job, he tells himself. Dining and entertainment, averaging about 900 a month, not because he's a foodie, but because when your circle goes out, you go out. And when they pick the place, you don't flinch at the bill. Add it up, and Marcus was spending about $36,000 a year on being perceived as successful. Here's the part that shocked him. I asked him to imagine redirecting just half of that. Not all of it, just half. $18,000 a year, invested consistently at a modest 8% return. Over the next 25 years, that's about $1.3 million. He went quiet. Because suddenly, the question wasn't, can I afford this car? The question became, is the impression this car makes worth $1.3 million of my future? And when you frame it that way, the answer changes. This is what I mean by the invisible price tag. We see the monthly payment. We justify the expense in isolation, but we never calculate the cumulative, compounding cost of maintaining an image. And we certainly don't compare that cost to what we're giving up. You're not just spending money on things. You're spending your future freedom on the appearance of present success. And the cruelest part, the people you're trying to impress aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. They're too busy trying to impress you. It's a cycle of mutual performance, and everyone's paying for a show no one's fully watching. So when I ask how much it costs to be you, I'm really asking this. How much of your lifetime earning potential are you willing to sacrifice so that acquaintances and strangers believe you've already made it? Because here's the truth. The version of you that looks the most successful is often the version that's furthest from actual financial security. Real wealth whispers. Image shouts. And shouting is exhausting and expensive. There's a specific kind of financial suffering that only happens to people who are doing well. It doesn't come from lack. It comes from proximity. You're not comparing yourself to people who are struggling. You're comparing yourself to the people just slightly ahead of you. The colleague who just got promoted. The friend who bought a house in that neighborhood. The person from college who's posting pictures from Santorini. And every time you see someone in your circle level up, something inside you whispers, I should be there too. That whisper is costing you everything. Psychologists call this the reference group effect. Your sense of financial well-being isn't determined by objective measures. It's determined by how you stack up against the people you consider your peers. And in the age of social media, your reference group isn't 10 people anymore. It's hundreds, thousands even, and they're all curating highlight reels. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's promotional content. And then spending real money to close a gap that doesn't even exist. Let me introduce you to Alicia. She's a marketing director at a mid-sized firm, 38 years old, earns about $115,000. She's talented, hardworking, respected, and absolutely exhausted. Because Alicia is trapped in what I call the lifestyle mirror. Every time someone in her circle does something, she feels the pull to match it. Not because she wants to, but because falling behind feels like failure. Her friend bought a Peloton. Now Alicia feels like her gym membership isn't enough. Another friend started going to a boutique fitness studio. So Alicia upgrades, $200 a month now instead of $50. Her coworker just came back from Napa, posted beautiful photos, talked about it at lunch. Suddenly, Alicia's weekend trips feel basic. So she books something more Instagrammable, adds another $2,000 to the credit card. A former classmate just bought a Tesla. Now Alicia's reliable sedan feels dated. She starts browsing, rationalizing, calculating payments. None of these are decisions she's making from a place of desire. They're reactions, reflexes. Defensive moves in a game she didn't sign up for but can't seem to quit. And here's the part that breaks my heart. When I asked Alicia what she actually wanted, she cried. She wanted to work less. She wanted to take a year off and travel slowly, not frantically. She wanted to stop performing and start living. But she couldn't, because she'd built a financial life that required her to keep running just to stay in place. She wasn't spending on her dreams. She was spending on other people's perception of success. And it was killing her, slowly and quietly. This is the comparison trap. It convinces you that keeping up is the same as moving forward. It makes you believe that if you're not matching the pace of your peers, you're falling behind. But the truth is more painful and more liberating than that. Your peers are just as trapped as you are. They're looking at you and feeling the same pressure. They're stretching themselves to project the same confidence. They're financing the same illusions, and everyone's pretending it's effortless. There's a term in economics called positional goods. These are things whose value comes not from what they do, but from the status they confer relative to others. A luxury watch doesn't tell time better than a $20 Casio, but it tells the world something about you. Or at least it tries to. The problem with positional goods is that they're part of an arms race. If everyone upgrades, no one gains status. You all just spend more to stay in the same relative position. It's exhausting, it's expensive, and it never ends. Because there will always be someone with more, always someone who just leveled up, always a new benchmark to chase. And if you let comparison dictate your spending, you'll never build wealth. You'll just build a more expensive version of keeping up. So what's the alternative? It starts with a simple but radical shift. Stop measuring your financial success by how you compare to others. Start measuring it by how close you are to the life you actually want. Not the life that looks good in pictures. Not the life that impresses people at parties. The life that feels right when no one's watching. Ask yourself, if no one ever knew, what would I actually spend money on? That's where your values live. That's where your real priorities hide. And that's the only compass worth following. Because here's the thing about the comparison trap. It doesn't just cost you money. It costs you identity. It turns you into a performer in someone else's play. And the longer you perform, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before the show started. You can't build wealth while trying to impress people. The two goals are fundamentally opposed. One requires patience, privacy, and delayed gratification. The other demands visibility, validation, and constant proof. Choose wisely, because you can look rich or be rich, but very few people manage both. Let me paint you a picture of a moment that happens more often than you'd think. It's a Tuesday afternoon. Someone sits across from a financial advisor for the first time in years. Maybe they're 42, maybe 47. They've been meaning to do this. Life just kept getting in the way. The advisor pulls up a retirement calculator, plugs in the numbers, current savings, monthly contributions, expected retirement age, and then the projection appears on the screen. There's always a pause, because the number is nowhere close to what they imagined. Not even in the same universe. They thought they were on track. They thought that because they were earning well, saving would somehow take care of itself. But the math doesn't lie. At this rate, they'll have maybe 30% of what they need to retire comfortably, maybe less. And the advisor asks gently, what happened? The answer is never dramatic. It's never a single disaster. It's always the same quiet accumulation of choices that felt reasonable at the time. I'll tell you about David, 45 years old, works in pharmaceutical sales. He's made good money for 2 decades. At his peak, he was pulling in over $200,000 a year. By every outward measure, David was successful. But when he finally sat down and looked at his retirement accounts, the total was just under $210,000. 2 decades of six-figure income, and barely enough saved to cover 4 years of modest living. He didn't lose it in a divorce, didn't have a medical crisis, didn't make any catastrophically bad investments. He just lived well, really well, and assumed there'd be time to catch up later. There's a phrase in behavioral economics called hyperbolic discounting. It's the tendency to prioritize immediate rewards over future benefits, even when the future benefits are objectively larger. Your brain is wired to value today more than tomorrow. It's not a character flaw. It's biology. But biology doesn't care about your retirement. Here's what actually happens. You're 30. Retirement is abstract, decades away, unreal. So when you have the choice between investing $500 or upgrading to the nicer hotel on your vacation, the hotel wins. Because it's tangible, it's now, it's real. You're 35. You tell yourself you'll start getting serious soon, but your income just went up, and with it, your lifestyle. You're finally able to afford the things you used to dream about. Why would you deprive yourself now? You've earned this. You're 40. Retirement starts to feel a little more real, but you've got other priorities. Maybe kids, maybe aging parents, maybe a home renovation. Retirement savings get pushed to next year, and then the year after that. You're 45. Now you're paying attention. And the gap between where you are and where you need to be is terrifying. So you either panic and overcorrect, or you avoid thinking about it altogether because the shame is too heavy. This is the pattern, and it's not rare, it's normal. But here's the part that should make you angry. The difference between financial security and financial anxiety in retirement often comes down to decisions you made in your 30s. Not because you were reckless, but because you didn't understand the cost of waiting. Let me show you what I mean with actual numbers, because this is where it gets visceral. If you start investing $500 a month at age 25, and you do that consistently until you're 65, assuming an 8% average annual return, you'll end up with about $1.7 million. If you wait until you're 35 to start, same amount, same return, you end up with roughly $740,000. 10 years of delay costs you nearly $1 million, not because you contributed less, but because you lost a decade of compounding. And if you wait until 45, you'll have around $300,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize that's supposed to last you 20, maybe 30 years. And it won't. This is the retirement you're not building, not because you can't, but because every dollar you spend on looking successful today is a dollar that will never have the chance to grow into security tomorrow. David understood this too late. When we calculated what he'd need to do to catch up, the number was sobering. He'd have to start contributing over $3,500 a month just to reach a baseline comfortable retirement. And that wasn't realistic given his current lifestyle costs. So he had a choice. Radically cut his lifestyle now or work until he physically couldn't anymore. He chose a third option. He started making changes, but slower than he needed to. Because even faced with the math, the idea of looking less successful felt unbearable. That's the emotional trap. We'd rather risk our future than face the social discomfort of downshifting. But here's what I wish someone had told David 20 years ago. The people who retire with dignity and freedom aren't the ones who look the most successful along the way. They're the ones who built quietly, who valued the boring, invisible work of consistent investing over the dopamine hit of a new status symbol. They're the ones who realize that retirement isn't something that happens to you. It's something you construct month by month, year by year, with choices no one applauds. Because nobody's cheering when you max out your retirement account. Nobody's liking and commenting when you automate your investments. Nobody's impressed when you drive a paid-off car. But 20 years later, you'll be free, and they'll still be working. Here's a truth that's hard to swallow. You might not actually like the life you're paying for. I don't mean you hate it. I mean that if you really examined it, if you stripped away the audience and the expectations and the fear of judgment, you might discover that a lot of what you spend money on isn't for you. It's for the character you've been cast as, the successful professional, the one who has it together, the person who made it. And that character is expensive to play. Let me tell you about Nina. She's 39, works in corporate law, makes just over $200,000 a year. She wears the right designers, lives in a high-rise downtown, drives a Range Rover, goes to the right restaurants, vacations in the right places. From the outside, Nina is the embodiment of success. But when we started talking about what actually brought her joy, something surprising happened. She hesitated, stumbled, couldn't really answer. Because she'd spent so long becoming the person she thought she was supposed to be, she'd lost track of who she actually was underneath it all. The clothes she wore, they were armor, a uniform. She didn't even particularly like most of them, but they communicated competence, authority, success. The apartment, it was beautiful, but she was never there. She worked 70-hour weeks. The apartment was more of a statement than a home. The car, she admitted she'd be just as happy in something simpler. But she couldn't shake the feeling that showing up in anything less would make her look like she was struggling. And in her world, perception was currency. Nina wasn't spending money on a life she loved. She was spending money on a life that looked right. This is what I call identity spending, and it's one of the most insidious forms of financial self-sabotage because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like an investment in yourself. But here's the reality. When your spending is driven by identity rather than values, you end up in a prison of your own making. Because identity is social. It's external. It requires maintenance and validation. You can't just be successful. You have to be seen as successful. And that means constantly feeding the image. Values, on the other hand, are internal. They don't need an audience. They're about what matters to you when no one's keeping score. And the gap between the two is where your money disappears. Think about the last significant purchase you made. Not groceries or gas. Something big. A trip. A gadget. A piece of furniture. An experience. Now ask yourself honestly, did I buy this because it genuinely aligns with what I value and enjoy? Or did I buy it because it fits the story I'm telling about who I am? There's no wrong answer. But there is an expensive one. Here's an exercise that changed everything for Nina. I asked her to imagine she was moving to a new city where no one knew her. No colleagues. No friends from her current life. No one to impress or explain herself to. In that scenario, what would she spend money on? She laughed. Then she got quiet. And then she said something I'll never forget. Honestly, I'd probably live in a smaller place, something cozy. I'd spend way less on clothes. I'd cook more. I'd spend more time outdoors. I'd travel, but differently. Less about the photo op and more about actually experiencing places. I asked her why she wasn't doing that now. She said, because that's not who people expect me to be. And there it is. She was spending 6 figures a year maintaining a version of herself that existed primarily for other people's comfort, not her own. The thing about identity spending is that it compounds just like investments do, except in reverse. You buy the designer bag. Now you need the outfit to go with it. Now you need the events to wear the outfit to. Now you need the car that matches the lifestyle. Now you need the apartment that fits the image. And on and on. Each purchase locks you further into a performance. And the cost of breaking character gets higher every year. But here's the liberating truth. You can change the character. You can rewrite the story. It starts with separating who you are from what you own. Your worth is not tied to your car. Your intelligence doesn't live in your wardrobe. Your success isn't measured by where you vacation. Those are just things. And things are terrible foundations for identity. The strongest, wealthiest, most content people I know have something in common. They've stopped outsourcing their self-worth to their consumption. They know who they are regardless of what they drive. They're comfortable with themselves even when no one's watching. And because of that, they don't need to spend money proving anything. They're free in a way that people drowning in status purchases will never be. So ask yourself, what would be left if you stripped away everything you own? Who are you without the image? That person, the one underneath all the performance, deserves a retirement, deserves freedom, deserves a future that isn't mortgaged to the opinions of people who don't actually matter. Start spending like that person exists, because they do. There's a kind of financial literacy that nobody talks about in school. It's not about budgeting or credit scores or even how compound interest works. It's about understanding the actual trade-offs you're making every single day. Most people think in terms of affordability. Can I afford this? If the answer is yes, if the money's in the account or the credit's available, the decision feels justified. But affordability is the wrong question. The right question is, what am I giving up to have this? Let me show you how the math actually works when you factor in opportunity cost, because this is where everything shifts. Imagine you're considering buying a new car. Maybe you've had your eye on something sleek, something that feels like an upgrade. The monthly payment is $800. You can afford it, your budget has room, so you sign. Most people stop the analysis there. $800 a month, manageable, done. But here's what actually just happened. Over the course of a 6-year loan, you'll pay $57,600 for that car. But the real cost isn't $57,000. Because if you'd taken that same $800 per month and invested it instead, at an average 8% annual return, you'd have nearly $73,000 at the end of those 6 years. Now let's say you keep the car for 10 years total. Reasonable, right? But here's the part that stings. If you'd continued investing that $800 per month for those additional 4 years after the loan was paid off, you'd be sitting on over $147,000. So that car didn't cost you $57,000. It cost you $147,000 in future wealth. And if you left that money invested for another 20 years without adding another dime, just letting it compound, that single decision to buy the car instead of invest would have cost you over $680,000. One car, one decision. Over $500,000 in lifetime opportunity cost. Now, I'm not saying never buy a car. I'm saying understand what you're actually trading. Because once you see it this way, you can't unsee it. Every purchase is a choice between now and later. Between the thing and what the thing costs you in future freedom. Let me tell you about James. He's a software engineer, 36 years old, makes about $160,000 a year. Smart guy, analytical, you'd think he'd have this figured out, but James loves watches. High-end watches, and over the years he's bought 4 of them. Total cost around $48,000. He justified each one. They hold value, he told himself. They're investments, plus he worked hard. He deserved something nice. When we ran the numbers together, reality hit hard. If he'd taken that $48,000 and invested it at age 28 when he bought the first watch, by the time he's 65, that money would be worth over $600,000. $600,000 for watches he wears maybe once a month. Watches that, despite what he told himself, have depreciated, not appreciated. He sat there staring at the screen. Then he said something that broke my heart. I thought I was rewarding myself, but I was just stealing from my future. This is the math they don't teach you. Not in school, not in the personal finance books that tell you to skip the latte. This is the deep, structural understanding that every dollar has a future value, and spending it today erases that future. Economists have a term for this. It's called the time value of money. A dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow because of its potential to grow. But here's the flip side. A dollar spent today is also worth far more than just that dollar. It's worth everything that dollar could have become. And when you're spending on image, on status, on keeping up, you're not just losing money. You're losing exponential future wealth. The most financially successful people I know don't think in terms of what things cost. They think in terms of what things cost them. That $3,000 vacation. It's not 3,000. It's what 3,000 becomes over 30 years, which is about $30,000. That designer handbag for 2,000. Over 25 years of compounding, that's around $13,000 you just decided wasn't worth having. None of this is about deprivation. It's about clarity. It's about making intentional choices with full knowledge of the trade, because here's the truth. Some things are worth it. Some experiences, some purchases, some moments are absolutely worth the future cost. But most aren't. Most are just reflexive, habitual, driven by something other than genuine value. And if you don't do the math, you'll never know the difference. So start asking yourself, is this worth what it's actually costing me? Not just the price tag, the real cost, the future cost, the compounding cost. Because once you see money as time and freedom rather than just spending power, everything changes. You stop buying things that don't matter. You stop funding an image that doesn't serve you. And you start building a future that does. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. The hardest part of changing your financial behavior isn't the spreadsheet. It isn't the budgeting or the discipline or even the sacrifice. It's the social consequences. It's what happens when you start saying no. No to the weekend trip everyone's planning. No to the dinner at the expensive place. No to the concert, the event, the thing everyone's doing. Because when you start prioritizing your future over your image, the people around you notice. And they don't always respond well. Some will question you. Some will judge you. Some will start to distance themselves. Not out of malice, but because your choices make them uncomfortable. Because if you can say no, it means they could too. And they're not ready to face that. This is the social cost of financial discipline, and it's real. Let me tell you about Renee. She's 32. Works in advertising. Makes about $95,000 a year. A few years ago, she had what she calls her financial awakening. She realized she was on track to have almost nothing saved by 40, so she made a decision. She was going to get serious. She started automating her retirement contributions, cut her discretionary spending by about 40%, stopped upgrading her phone every year, moved to a less expensive apartment, started cooking more, stopped saying yes to every social invitation that came with a price tag. Within 6 months, her savings rate went from nearly zero to almost 30% of her income. Financially, she was winning. Socially, she was struggling. Her friends started making comments, little jabs at first. Oh, Renee can't come, she's saving for retirement. said with a laugh but with an edge. Then the invitation slowed down. She wasn't being excluded intentionally, but she also wasn't part of the spontaneous plans anymore, because everyone assumed she'd say no. And the hardest part, she started to feel like she was missing out. Not on the things themselves, but on the connection, the belonging, because here's what nobody tells you. Money isn't just about transactions, it's social glue. Spending together is how modern friendships are maintained. Dinners, drinks, trips, events, experiences. And when you stop spending the way your circle spends, you risk becoming an outsider in your own life. This is why so many people who know better still don't change. Because the social cost feels too high. But here's what Renee discovered. The friends who fell away weren't really her friends. They were activity partners. People she did things with, not people who actually knew her. The real friends, the ones who mattered, stayed. And more than that, some of them started asking questions. How are you doing this? Why did you decide to change? Can you help me figure this out? Her discipline gave others permission to question their own choices. And over time, Renee built a new kind of social life. One that wasn't centered on consumption. Potlucks instead of restaurants. Hiking instead of shopping. Game nights instead of bar crawls. She didn't lose connection. She just changed the currency. But I won't sugarcoat it. The transition was hard. There were moments of loneliness. Moments where she questioned whether it was worth it. And then she looked at her account balances. Watched them grow month after month. Felt the weight of financial anxiety lift just a little. Imagined a future where she wasn't trapped by her paycheck. And she knew it was worth it. Here's the thing about saying no. It gets easier. The first few times feel excruciating. You worry about what people think. You worry about being left out. You feel cheap or awkward or like you're failing at adulthood. But the more you do it, the more you realize something liberating. Most people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are. They're too worried about their own lives, their own image, their own anxiety. And the ones who do judge you, they're usually the ones most trapped by their own spending. Your choices threaten their narrative, so they push back. Let them. Because you're not changing your life to make them comfortable. You're changing it to make your future possible. There's a concept in psychology called social proof. We look to others to determine what's normal, what's acceptable, what's right. And when everyone around you is spending freely, it feels abnormal to hold back. But normal is not the same as wise, and popular is not the same as sustainable. The wealthiest people I know, the ones with real financial security, are often the ones who look the least impressive. They drive older cars. They live in modest homes. They don't broadcast their vacations or their purchases, not because they can't afford to, but because they've learned that the approval of others is a terrible investment. They've paid the social cost of saying no. And on the other side of that cost, they found freedom. So yes, saying no is hard. Yes, you might lose some people. Yes, there will be moments of doubt. But here's what you gain: clarity, control, a future that isn't mortgaged to someone else's expectations. And eventually, you'll find your people. The ones who value you for who you are, not what you spend. The ones who respect your choices even when they don't make the same ones. Those are the relationships worth keeping. The rest were just expensive distractions. Start saying no. Not to life, not to joy, but to the pressure to perform, to the exhausting work of keeping up. Say no to the things that don't serve your future, and watch what happens. You might be surprised by how much space opens up, how much peace walks in, how much freedom starts to grow. There's a moment that comes for everyone who decides to step off the treadmill of image-driven spending. It usually happens quietly. Maybe you're scrolling through social media and you see someone flaunting their latest luxury purchase. And instead of that familiar pang of envy or inadequacy, you feel nothing, maybe even a little bit of pity, because you've started to see through it. You've realized that the highlight reel isn't the whole story. That the person posting the designer bag might be drowning in credit card debt. That the couple on their third international trip this year might be ignoring the fact that they have nothing saved for emergencies, let alone retirement. You've started to understand that what looks like winning is often just expensive losing in disguise. This is the shift. And once it happens, you can't go back. But here's the hard part. Once you stop measuring success by external markers, you have to figure out what success actually means to you. And most people have never done that work. We inherit definitions of success from our parents, from our culture, from the media we consume and the people we admire. And we spend decades chasing goals we never consciously chose. The corner office, the luxury car, the impressive home, the enviable vacation, the wardrobe, the watch, the status. But what if none of that actually matters to you? What if your version of success is something entirely different? Let me tell you about Carlos. He's 41. Spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder in finance. Made it to VP level. Was pulling in close to $300,000 a year. By every traditional measure, he'd made it, but he was miserable. The money was good. But the cost was his life. 80-hour weeks, constant stress, a marriage that was barely hanging on, kids he saw for maybe an hour a day, health problems from the anxiety and the sedentary lifestyle. He looked successful. He felt hollow. One day, his daughter asked him why he was always on his phone. She was 6, and the question broke something open in him. He started asking himself what he actually wanted, not what he was supposed to want, not what impressed other people, but what would make him feel like his life was his own. The answer surprised him. He wanted time. He wanted to coach his daughter's soccer team. He wanted to have dinner with his family without checking email. He wanted to take a walk in the middle of the day without guilt. He wanted to sleep without his jaw clenched. So he did something radical. He took a lower position at a smaller firm, cut his income almost in half, went down to $160,000. His peers thought he'd lost his mind. Some suggested he was having a breakdown. Others distanced themselves as if failure might be contagious. But Carlos didn't care, because for the first time in years he felt like he was living instead of performing. He and his wife downsized, sold the house in the prestigious neighborhood and bought something smaller in a quieter area, got rid of one of their cars, started cooking at home more, stopped trying to keep up, and something unexpected happened. Their savings rate went up. Even on half the income, they were saving more than they had before, because they weren't spending money on a lifestyle designed to impress people they didn't even like. Carlos redefined success, and in doing so, he found something most high earners never get: peace. Here's what I want you to understand. Success is not one size fits all. The version being sold to you, the one that requires constant consumption and perpetual upgrades, is just one option. And it's usually the most expensive and least fulfilling one. Real success is alignment. It's when your daily life reflects your actual values, when your spending supports the things that genuinely matter to you, when you're not performing for an audience but living for yourself. So how do you figure out what success means to you? Start by asking better questions. Not what do I want to buy, but what do I want my days to feel like? Not what will impress people, but what will I be proud of when I'm older? Not what's everyone else doing, but what brings me actual joy. These questions don't have easy answers. They require honesty. They require you to strip away the conditioning and the comparison and sit with what's true for you. For some people, Success might be retiring at 50 and spending a decade traveling slowly. For others, it might be working forever but on their own terms, building something meaningful. For some, it's having the freedom to say no without financial fear. For others, it's the ability to be generous without it hurting. There's no wrong answer. There's only your answer. But here's the critical part. Once you define it, you have to build toward it. And that means making choices that align with your definition, not someone else's. It means saying no to things that don't serve your version of success, even if they look good on paper. It means spending money on what genuinely matters and refusing to spend on what doesn't, regardless of what's trendy or expected. It means being willing to look less successful in the short term so you can be actually successful in the long term. Because here's the truth. The people who look the most successful right now are often the least free. They're locked into lifestyles they can't afford to leave, trapped by golden handcuffs and image maintenance and the fear of what people will think. But the people who have defined success on their own terms, they're free in ways that money can't buy. They're not worried about keeping up. They're not performing. They're not exhausted by the weight of other people's expectations. They're just living, intentionally, authentically, and quietly building wealth in the background while everyone else is busy looking wealthy in the foreground. That's the trade. Visibility now or freedom later. Performance today or peace tomorrow. Choose wisely, because you can't have both. There's a reason the truly wealthy don't talk about money. It's not because they're modest or humble, though some are. It's because they understand something fundamental. Wealth is private. Status is public, and the two rarely coexist. The moment you start broadcasting your financial wins, you invite comparison, judgment, expectation, and pressure. You turn your wealth into a performance, and performances are expensive to maintain. Real wealth is built in silence. In the boring, unglamorous work of consistent saving and disciplined investing. In the decisions no one sees and no one celebrates. Let me tell you what wealth actually looks like when it's being built. It looks like automatic transfers on the first of every month. Money moving from checking to investments before you even see it. Before you have a chance to spend it on something that feels more immediate, more rewarding, more real. It looks like driving a 7-year-old car that runs perfectly fine while your neighbor finances a brand new one. It looks like living in a neighborhood that's good enough instead of the one that's impressive. It looks like saying no to the upgraded subscription, the premium version, the latest model. Not because you can't afford it, but because you've decided your future freedom is worth more than the marginal improvement. It looks like packing lunch while your coworkers go out, like buying the store brand, like wearing last season's clothes, like taking a modest vacation or no vacation at all some years. None of this is Instagram-worthy. None of it gets likes or comments or admiration. It's invisible, quiet, almost boring, and that's exactly why it works. Let me introduce you to Michelle and Tony. They're both 49. They've been married for 23 years. For most of that time, they've earned a combined income between $120,000 and $150,000. Solidly middle class. Nothing spectacular, but their net worth just crossed $2.4 million. How? They built wealth in silence. They've lived in the same modest house for 18 years. It's in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy. They bought it well below what they were approved for. While their friends were stretching to buy the biggest house they could qualify for, Michelle and Tony chose comfort over impression. They drive used cars, always have. They buy them with cash, drive them for 10 to 12 years, then replace them with another reliable used vehicle. No payments. No interest, no status signaling. They don't have the latest gadgets. Their phones are a generation or two behind. Their TV is old. Their furniture is functional. None of it looks like a magazine spread. When their friends started taking lavish vacations, Michelle and Tony kept going to the same lake cabin they'd been renting for years. They didn't upgrade to Europe or the Caribbean. They didn't feel the need. And here's the thing: nobody noticed. Nobody was paying that much attention. Everyone was too busy managing their own image to scrutinize Michelle and Tony's choices. But while their peers were financing lifestyles, Michelle and Tony were funding their future. They maxed out their retirement accounts every single year, contributed to taxable investment accounts on top of that. Let compound interest do the heavy lifting. And now, at 49, they're less than 5 years from being able to retire completely if they want to. Not because they earned more than everyone else, but because they spent less and invested the difference, quietly, consistently, without fanfare. This is what building wealth in silence looks like, and it's available to almost anyone willing to do the work. But here's the catch. You have to be okay with looking ordinary. You have to be comfortable with people underestimating you. You have to let go of the need for external validation, because wealth building and image building are opposing forces. Every dollar you spend on looking successful is a dollar that can't compound into actual success. There's a concept called stealth wealth. It's when people have significant financial resources, but you'd never know it by looking at them. They don't dress the part. They don't drive the part. They don't live in the showiest house or vacation in the flashiest places. They look normal, maybe even below average relative to their income. But behind the scenes, they're financially bulletproof. They have options, freedom, security, the ability to weather storms that would destroy their more impressive-looking peers. Stealth wealth isn't about being cheap or depriving yourself. It's about being strategic. It's about understanding that the most valuable thing money can buy isn't stuff. It's autonomy, the ability to quit a job that's killing you, the ability to take a year off, the ability to retire early, the ability to help your kids without it hurting, the ability to say no without fear. That's what you're building when you build wealth in silence. Not a showcase, a foundation, and foundations aren't sexy. They're underground, hidden. No one sees them being poured, but they're what keeps everything else standing when the storms come. So stop announcing your financial moves. Stop posting about purchases. Stop signaling status. Just build, quietly, consistently, month after month, year after year. Automate your investments so you don't have to think about it. Increase your contributions every time you get a raise. Let the market do its work. Ignore the noise. And in 20 years, 30 years, when your peers are still working because they have to, you'll have something they don't. Not a better car or a bigger house, but freedom. Real, tangible, life-changing freedom. And that's worth more than every status symbol combined. Build in silence. Let your freedom make the noise. So here we are. We've walked through the mechanics of how image-driven spending quietly dismantles your financial future. We've seen the invisible price tags, the comparison traps, the retirement accounts that never get built. We've met people who looked successful but felt trapped, and others who looked ordinary but built extraordinary freedom. And if you've made it this far, I'm guessing something resonated. Maybe you saw yourself in one of these stories. Maybe you felt that uncomfortable recognition when we talked about spending to impress people who aren't even paying attention. Maybe you've started doing the math in your head, calculating what your own status purchases have actually cost you. That discomfort, that's not a bad thing. That's awareness. And awareness is always the first step toward change. But here's what I want you to understand as we close. This isn't about shame. This isn't about beating yourself up for past decisions or feeling like you failed because you bought the nice car or the expensive watch or took the trip you couldn't quite afford. You're human. You live in a culture that's engineered to make you consume. A system that profits when you confuse spending with success, when you outsource your self-worth to your possessions, when you stay on the treadmill of keeping up. You didn't design this system, but you can choose to step out of it, and that choice doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require going to extremes or living like a monk or never enjoying anything again. It just requires intention. It requires asking before every significant purchase, is this moving me toward the life I actually want, or is this just maintaining an image I've been taught to value? It requires being honest about the difference between what brings you genuine joy and what brings you temporary validation. It requires having the courage to disappoint people's expectations of you, to look less successful than you could, to live below your means even when you don't have to. Because that gap, that space between what you earn and what you spend, that's where your future lives. That's where freedom grows. Let me leave you with one more story. Her name is Patricia. She's 63 now. When I met her 5 years ago, she was still working. Not because she loved her job, but because she had to. She'd spent her entire career earning good money, living well, keeping up appearances. And at 58, she had less than $100,000 saved. The realization hit her hard. She'd done everything right according to the script she'd been handed. She'd climbed the ladder. She'd bought the things. She'd lived in the right places, worn the right clothes, signaled success at every turn. But she wasn't successful. She was stuck. So she made a decision. She had 10 years, maybe less, to turn this around. And she was going to spend those years building what she should have been building all along. She downsized aggressively, moved to a smaller apartment, sold her luxury car and bought something practical, cut her spending by nearly 60%, started saving and investing half her income. Her friends thought she was crazy. Some worried she was in financial trouble. Others just drifted away because she was no longer playing the same game. But Patricia didn't care. Because for the first time in her adult life, she was making decisions based on what she wanted, not what she thought she was supposed to want. 5 years later, her net worth has crossed $450,000. In 5 years, she more than quadrupled what it took her 30 years to accumulate. And she's on track to retire at 66 with enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She told me recently that the last 5 years have been the most empowering of her life, not because of the money itself, but because of what the money represents: agency, control, the ability to make choices based on her values instead of her fears. She said, "I wasted decades trying to prove I was successful. Now I actually am, and nobody knows but me, and that's exactly how I want it." That's the paradox. The version of success that everyone can see is usually the one that costs you everything. The version no one sees is the one that actually sets you free. So what now? You have a choice in front of you. You can keep doing what you've been doing. Keep chasing the image. Keep spending to maintain a version of yourself that exists for other people's consumption. Keep postponing the hard work of building real wealth because it doesn't come with applause. Or you can start today, right now, this moment. You can open your banking app and set up an automatic transfer to your retirement account, even if it's small, even if it feels insignificant. Because small and consistent beats large and sporadic every single time. You can look at your upcoming expenses, the ones driven by image and expectation, and ask yourself honestly if they're worth the future you're trading. You can have a conversation with your partner, your friends, yourself, about what you actually value versus what you've been conditioned to pursue. You can start saying no, not to life, but to the performance of life. You can stop announcing your purchases and start automating your investments. You can choose silence over status, substance over signal, freedom over appearance. It won't be easy. There will be moments of doubt, moments where you feel like you're missing out or falling behind, moments where the social pressure feels almost unbearable. But on the other side of those moments is something most people never experience: the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're building something real, the peace that comes from living in alignment with your values, the freedom that comes from not needing anyone's approval. Your future self is waiting. The one who's free, the one who made it not because they looked the part but because they did the work no one was watching. That person is counting on the choices you make today, the investments you automate, the status purchases you decline, the courage you summon to live differently than everyone around you. Be the person who builds wealth in silence and lets freedom make the noise. Be the person who values substance over appearance, autonomy over approval, long-term security over short-term validation. Be the person who retires with dignity because you had the courage to look ordinary while everyone else was desperate to look exceptional. Your retirement isn't something that happens to you. It's something you construct, one intentional decision at a time, over decades of choices no one celebrates until it's too late for them to start. Don't let image steal your future. Don't trade 30 years of freedom for 30 years of looking good. You're smarter than that. You're stronger than that. And you're worth more than the story other people are telling about success. Start today. Start small if you need to, but start. Because every day you wait is a day of compound growth you'll never get back. And time, unlike money, can't be earned again. So here's my question for you, the one I want you to sit with long after this audiobook ends. What does freedom actually look like for you? Not the performance of success, not the image of wealth, but real, lived, daily freedom. And what are you willing to give up today to have that tomorrow? That's the trade. And it's the most important one you'll ever make. If this resonated with you, if something here shifted your perspective or challenged your thinking, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment. Share what stood out. Tell me where you are in your journey and where you're trying to go. And if you found value in this, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Not to show off what you're learning, but because real change happens when we stop pretending everything's fine and start having honest conversations about what actually matters. There are more conversations like this waiting for you here on Asset Audiobooks. Real talk about money, wealth, mindset, and the choices that shape the life you actually get to live. Until next time, remember this. Take care of your money and it will take care of you.